With more than 100 years of experience between the four of them, covering Minnesota high school athletics, the Minnesota Sun newspaper's sports editors bring you Sun on Sports.
Welcome to Sun on Sports. I'm your host for the day, John Sherman. With me are my colleagues Mike Shaughnessy on the left and Greg Kleven on my right. We have breaking news today. September 3rd will go down as an historic day for the suburban sports scene as a new conference forms. Mike, you've been following this story. In fact, you've already got a story on our website about this new conference. Please tell us what has happened.
Well, John, it's interesting thing is that one of Minnesota's longest running high school sports conferences, its future is going to be in some doubt now because nine members of the Lake Conference today announced that they intend to leave to form their own league. They're going to take Prior Lake of the Minnesota Conference with them in a new conference that would be whose proposed name is the South Suburban Conference. What that would mean for the Lake Conference, which has existed in one form or another since 1932, is as of next fall, it would have 5 members. It would have Eden Prairie plus the 4 Classic Lake Conference schools that were placed in the lake just 2 weeks ago.
Little history on the Lake Conference. It did form, as Mike said, in 1932. Some of the teams back then were Excelsior, Hopkins, University High School, St. Louis Park, so a lot of tradition in that conference. Greg, the surprise in this for me with the new South Suburban Conference is that Bloomington has gone with the schools south of the river. There was speculation that the south of the river schools would stick together, but not necessarily any speculation that Bloomington would be joining them. Did you see this coming?
Yes, I knew they were very serious about joining the Dakota County schools and stuff. But apparently there was a lot of politics behind the scenes, and Bloomington didn't know until a week or two ago that they had enough votes for some of the schools on the south side to get into the conference. But they've apparently they got enough support, so they accepted Kennedy and Jefferson. And Ted Schultz, Bloomington athletic director, and he was former Bloomington athletic director until they split the role, Kennedy and Jefferson. He told me today that they plan to. This is just an intent to form the new conference, and that by July 1st they'll actually have, I guess, a written or finalized plans on the conference and stuff. He said a lot of things still could change, and the State High School League could also do some things regarding the Eden Prairie and then the 4 Classic Lake schools that were inserted into or placed into the Lake Conference. So, but I saw this coming. It's a good fit for the Bloomington schools because they've always been 2 of the smaller enrollment schools in the Lake Conference. Ted Schultz was telling me that it should compact some of their travel schedules and stuff, and give them Jefferson and Kennedy a chance to deal with schools of similar enrollment. So it's as far as Bloomington, they're happy with being part of this new South Suburban Athletic Conference.
Yeah, John, they're announcing this now because they want it to be a reality by next fall, and to have this happen, schools have to withdraw from the Lake Conference by October 1st if their intent is to leave by the next school year. Now, there are a couple of hoops that they still have to jump through. There are 4 different school districts involved, and each school board has to approve this measure. Plus, each of the 10 schools that's proposing to join this conference has to file notice to leave its present conference. But I would see all of those as pretty much formalities at this point.
That's a good point, Mike. I'd like to touch on the Classic Lake schools. They're back to square one, basically. The Classic Lake schools in this case.
Again.
They include Edina, Hopkins, Minnetonka, and Wayzata. They're basically schools without a conference once again. And Greg, the odd team out in the Lake Conference, of course, is Eden Prairie. They've kind of gotten the boot in this whole thing. What's their reaction going to be, or have you talked to Mike Grant yet about this?
Well, the only thing that Mike has always told me is we're going to remain. Eden Prairie is going to remain a part of the Lake Conference, no matter what. He was pretty gung ho that Eden Prairie was going to be part of the Lake Conference. What this new Lake Conference is going to look like, I don't know. I have to feel that the State High School League is going to place a couple of schools into that conference so they have at least a 7, perhaps an 8-school conference to make it easier for scheduling and stuff. Otherwise, if it's back to 5 schools, you got the same problems that these Classic Lake schools have had for, the last 3-4 years?
Now, the question I have about this, John and Greg, is what's going to happen if, say, we have a 5-school Lake Conference next year. What's to stop those 5 schools from basically colluding to eject one of its members, sort of like the Classic Lake schools did with Armstrong, and forcing the high school league's hand again? I think that it looks to me like a merry-go-round that could start up again in another year or two.
What I could see, Mike, that's a good point. What I could see is that the high school league might jump in and say, Eden Prairie is a Lake Conference member. Eden Prairie stays with the Lake Conference. Prior Lake, stay with the Minnesota or find another home and keep this conference together in that way.
Prior Lake has been actively looking to leave the Minnesota, so they, I don't know. And plus, the high school league, you have to consider what they're by statute allowed to do. I don't know that they're allowed to pull teams out of existing conferences and place them in other conferences. What they can do is, if a school doesn't have a conference, much like Cretan Durham Hall did a few years ago. They exhaust all the options for joining another conference. In Cretan's case, they applied to join a couple of conferences, got turned down. Then the high school league can move in and assign a school to a conference. I don't know if statutes allow them to pull schools out of existing conferences where they're members in good standing and place them elsewhere.
Actually, Eden Prairie has not been mentioned as a conference member with the Classic Lake schools at any time in this process. I don't think anybody is lining up to play Eden Prairie in their overall sports program. They've had, isn't it, Greg? They've been the all sports champions for a few years now.
They won the Challenge Cup championship or trophy or whatever they give them. Three of the 6 years they've had the Challenge Cup, and I think Wayzata has been first or second and a couple of the others. It's a good competitive fit with Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, Hopkins, Wayzata, and Edina. But they have to have more numbers in that conference, and that's going to be the problem.
It's just awful from the standpoint of trying to put together a schedule. I mean, how'd you like to be Hopkins boys basketball team with 8 conference games and having to schedule 17 non-conference games?
It's that's one of the problems, Mike, that we have now, and we're not going to see schools lining up that want to be in a conference with these 5 schools. That's the overall problem. Let's take a short break now, and we'll come back with more football talk on Sun on Sports.
Stay tuned for more Sun on Sports, your insider's guide to Minnesota high school athletics. For the scores and more, tune in daily to mnsun.com/sports.